The night my son told me to get out of my own house, I was standing in the kitchen I had remodeled with my own hands 23 years ago. I remember the exact tile I was looking at. The small crack in the grout near the stove, the one I'd always meant to fix and never did. My son was behind me. His wife was by the door. And I just stood there staring at that crack like it was the most important thing in the world. Because if I looked at either of them, I don't know what I would have done. Let me back up. My name is Russell. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working maintenance and operations for a paper mill outside Asheville, North Carolina. I'm not a complicated man. I like my coffee black. I like college football. And I liked, past tense I know, the idea that family means something. My wife Connie passed away 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer. It was fast, the way those things sometimes are, which people tell you is a mercy, and maybe they're right. We had one son together. His name is Derek. He was 27 when his mother died, and I watched him grieve in a way that looked a lot like anger. And I gave him space for it, because that's what Connie would have wanted. For a few years after that, Derek and I were close in the way that two people who've lost the same person are close. We'd watch games together. He'd come by on Sundays. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then he met Stacy. I want to be fair here. I really do. When Derek first brought her home, I thought she was charming, quick with a smile, always had something to say. She worked in real estate, which in retrospect explains a lot about how she looked at my house the first time she walked through it. They dated for about a year, got engaged, and I paid for most of the wedding because Derek asked and because I thought I was investing in his happiness. The venue alone was $11,000. I didn't complain. I signed the check and told myself this is what fathers do. They rented an apartment in Charlotte for the first 2 years of their marriage. Then Stacy lost her real estate license. I never got a full explanation, just something about a compliance issue, and Derek's hours at the logistics company where he worked got cut. They were underwater on their finances. Derek called me one evening, and he sounded like he did when he was a teenager who'd made a mistake. Ashamed. Small. He asked if they could move in with me. Just temporarily. 6 months, maybe 8, until they got back on their feet. I said yes. My house has 3 bedrooms. I live alone. The math seemed simple. I want to tell you exactly when things started to change, but the honest answer is that it happened so gradually I didn't notice until it was already done. It's like that thing with a frog in the water. By the time you feel the heat, you're already cooked. The first month was fine. They kept to themselves mostly. Derek helped me clean the gutters one weekend, which hadn't been done in 2 years, and I thought maybe this was going to work out. Maybe we'd actually get some time back together. But Stacy didn't like my living room furniture. She mentioned it once, casually, just an observation. Then she mentioned it again. Then, one afternoon, I came home from a doctor's appointment, and there were throw pillows on my couch that I'd never seen before in my life. Decorative pillows. 7 of them. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was harmless. Then she rearranged the kitchen. Just reorganized the cabinets, she said. It makes more sense this way. I spent 2 weeks not being able to find my own coffee mugs. I mentioned it to Derek, and he said, "Come on, Dad. She's just trying to help." After that, I stopped mentioning things to Derek. By month 4, Stacy had claimed the second bathroom as her personal spa, which meant I was sharing the main bathroom with Derek, and my den, where I kept my woodworking tools, my bookshelves, the desk where Connie used to pay our bills, had been converted into what Stacy called her home office. One afternoon, I walked in there to get a book I'd left on the shelf, and Stacy looked at me like I'd walked into her bedroom without knocking. "I'm kind of in the middle of something," she said. I picked up my book and left without another word. The 6 months became 8. The 8 became 12. I stopped asking about their timeline because every time I did, Stacy would start talking about the housing market and interest rates and how it wouldn't be responsible to move right now, and Derek would go quiet in a way that told me the conversation was over. I had a neighbor, a retired postal worker named Jim, who'd lived 2 doors down since before Connie and I moved in. We used to drink coffee on my front porch on Saturday mornings. One Saturday, Stacy came out and said she was having some of her work friends over that afternoon and asked if I could maybe take my little morning coffee thing inside or wrap it up early. Jim looked at me. I looked at Jim. I wrapped it up early. That night I sat in my bedroom, my own bedroom in my own house, and I asked myself a question that I hadn't let myself ask before. When did I become a guest here? When did my comfort stop mattering? I didn't have a good answer. The shift had been too slow, too quiet. Like a tide coming in, I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. I noticed that Stacy referred to the house as our place when she was on the phone with her friends, not my father-in-law's house. Not even where we're staying. Our place. Like it had already been decided. I noticed that Derek hadn't asked me how I was doing in months. Not really asked. Not the way you ask when you actually want to know. I noticed that when I sat in my usual chair at dinner, the chair I'd sat in for 20 years, the chair that faced the window where I used to watch the backyard while Connie washed dishes, Stacy had started sitting in it first. Every time. And I'd moved without even realizing I was moving. Things came to a head on a Tuesday in March. I had a routine. Every Tuesday, I'd go to my brother-in-law's house about 30 minutes north, and we'd watch the game, and I'd come home by 9. It was one of the only things I still had that felt like mine. That Tuesday, I came home a little early, maybe 8:30. There were cars in my driveway that I didn't recognize. I could hear music from outside, not loud enough to bother the neighbors, but present. Deliberate. I walked in, and there were people in my living room. 8, maybe 10 people. I didn't know any of them. Someone had rearranged the furniture. My couch was pushed against the wall. There was a folding table in the middle with wine glasses on it, and someone had put a candle on my fireplace mantel right next to the framed photo of Connie. Right next to it. I stood in my own doorway and tried to figure out what I was looking at. Stacy came around the corner and saw me, and the expression on her face, for just 1 second, was annoyance. Pure, unguarded annoyance. Then the smile came back. "Oh, Russell, you're home early. We're just having a little get-together." "In my house," I said. She laughed like I'd made a joke. "Don't be weird about it. Go relax in your room. We'll clean up by 11. Go relax in your room. In my room. In my house." I looked for Derek. He was in the kitchen talking to someone, laughing. He caught my eye and gave me the kind of wave you give someone you're mildly happy to see at a work function. Then he turned back to his conversation. Something in me went very, very quiet. I didn't make a scene. That's not who I am. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I could hear the party going on. I could hear Stacy laughing. At one point, I heard her say, in a voice that was carrying more than she probably intended, "He literally just walked in and stared at everyone." So awkward. Laughter. Other people's laughter. In my house, I made a decision that night. A calm one. The kind of decision that doesn't feel like a decision in the moment because it feels more like just finally seeing something clearly. I called my attorney the next morning. His name's Franklin, and he's been handling my affairs since before Connie died, and he knows me well enough that when I said I need to talk about my house, he heard something in my voice and said, "Come in today." I explained the situation. Franklin listened without interrupting, which is why I've kept him for 15 years. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Russell, they have no legal claim to your property. None. You're not on a lease with them. You've made no written agreements. They've been living there at your discretion. You can ask them to leave, and you are entitled to have that respected." "How much notice do I have to give them?" I asked. In North Carolina, for an informal living arrangement like this, you typically give 30 days as a courtesy. But given what you're describing, the use of your personal spaces, the parties without permission, you have more standing than you might think. I drafted a letter that afternoon. Polite, specific, 30 days, which was more than fair. I won't pretend Derek took it well. He came to my room that evening, my room, though I'd started thinking of it as a refuge, with the letter in his hand, and his face was something I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Not shame this time. Anger. You're kicking us out. After everything, I repeated. He said I was being selfish, that I had this big house and we were family, and I was throwing them out over a few pillows and a party. I asked him if he remembered the last time he asked me how I was doing. He didn't answer that. He said Stacy was upset. I told him Stacy was upset. I told him Stacy was welcome to be upset. Then he said something I won't repeat here, and he put his hand on my shoulder in a way that was not kind, and I stepped back from him and said very quietly, "Don't do that." He dropped his hand. We looked at each other for a long moment, and I think both of us understood that something had just been broken that was going to be very hard to repair. They moved out 3 weeks later. Stacy's parents let them stay in their spare room in Greensboro. I don't know how long they planned to impose on them, and honestly, it wasn't my problem anymore. The night after they left, I slept with my bedroom door open for the first time in 14 months. I put my coffee mugs back where they belonged. I sat in my chair at dinner. I called Jim and told him Saturday morning was back on, and I thought that was the end of it. I genuinely thought the chapter was closed. Then, about a week after they'd moved out, my neighbor Greta, she's in her 70s, sharp as anyone I know, watches everything on our street from her kitchen window, called me and said, "Russell, did you know your son and his wife are throwing a party tonight?" I didn't understand what she meant at first. "They came by this afternoon," she said. "Stacy had a key. They let themselves in while you were out." I felt something cold move through me. "Greta," I said, "I'm going to need you to do me a favor." I called Franklin first. Then I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation, that 2 people who had been asked to vacate my property were in my home without my permission. The dispatcher was helpful. She said an officer could meet me there. By the time I pulled into my street, there were 4 cars in my driveway. Music was going. Through the living room window, I could see people moving around, silhouettes, the flicker of someone's phone flashlight being used as a strobe. I sat in my car for a moment. Then I got out. I could hear Stacy before I opened the door. She was mid-sentence, mid-laugh, holding a glass of something red, wearing what looked like a new dress. The kind of energy in the room was celebratory, performatively so. "Finally, I cannot even tell you. I feel like I can breathe again. This place is ours now, and I am never." She turned when the door opened. The way her face changed was something I will remember for the rest of my life. The laugh didn't stop so much as it fell. Dropped, like something she'd been holding slipped out of her hands. Derek was behind her. He saw me. He looked at the door. He looked at Stacy. "Hi," I said. Nobody spoke. "You know," I said, conversationally, "I was going to knock. But it's my house." 2 police officers came in behind me. Franklin's paralegal, who I'd called on the way over, stood just outside on the porch with a copy of my deed and the formal notice I'd sent 3 weeks prior. The room cleared out fast. Stacy's friends, whoever they were, didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their things and they left. And it was almost impressive how quickly people can disappear when the situation changes on them. Stacy was not as quick. She stood her ground for a moment, and I could see her calculating, the way she always calculated, figuring out what angle might work here. She started to say something about having a key, that she'd just come to get some things she'd left behind. One of the officers, a young woman with a patient expression, explained very calmly that being in possession of a key did not constitute permission to access a property, and that the owner's presence and formal documentation superseded any informal arrangement that may have existed previously. Stacy looked at me over the officer's shoulder. I looked back at her. "The lock will be changed tomorrow," I said. Derek didn't say anything the entire time. He stood near the hallway and watched, and I didn't look at him much because looking at him too long made me feel something I wasn't ready to deal with yet. Not anger. Something older and sadder than anger. After they left, for real this time, with an officer watching them back out of my driveway, I walked through my house slowly. The living room, the kitchen, my den, which still smelled faintly of the candles Stacy had burned in there. I picked up the framed photo of Connie from the mantel and held it for a minute. "I should have done this sooner," I told her. "But here's what I didn't know that night. Here's the part that came later. Franklin had done some digging, the way he does, quietly, without fanfare. And he'd discovered something during the process of documenting the situation for potential civil action. Stacy, it turned out, had a first husband, not an ex-husband. A current one, a man she'd married in Tennessee 7 years ago, a marriage that had never been legally dissolved, which meant that her marriage to my son was not, in any legal sense, a marriage at all. When Franklin called me with this, there was a long pause on my end. "What does that mean for Derek?" I asked. "It means he's not married," Franklin said. "It means any joint financial decisions made under the assumption of that marriage should be reviewed. And it means that if there are any assets Stacy has been positioning herself to access through the marriage, she has no legal standing." There had been assets. Derek had told me, in passing, that Stacy had been talking to a financial planner about updating the beneficiary information on a life insurance policy Derek held, a policy that Derek's grandfather had originally set up for him years ago, worth enough to matter. It never got updated. The timing, in retrospect, is interesting. I didn't take pleasure in this, or at least I tried not to. Derek was humiliated. He went very quiet for a long time, the way he went quiet when his mother died, and I recognized that grief, and I didn't push him. I let him come to me, and eventually, about 2 months later, he did. He came to the house on a Sunday afternoon, parked in the driveway, sat in his car for a few minutes, then came to the door and knocked. He knocked on my door, which is something I noticed and appreciated more than I could have explained. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. Neither of us said much for a while. Finally, Derek said, "I don't know how I let it get that far." "You're not the first person who's ever made that mistake," I said. "I was awful to you, Dad." I looked at my coffee cup. "Yeah," I said. "You were." He nodded. He wasn't looking for me to argue about it or let him off the hook, and I didn't. I just let it sit there. Then I said, "You're still my son. That's not going anywhere." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you just say that like it's nothing?" "Because it is nothing," I said. "It's not forgiveness. It's not pretending it didn't happen. It's just a fact. You're my kid. Connie loved you. That doesn't change." He cried a little, which is something I hadn't seen him do since his mother's funeral, and I let him do it without making it a production. We stayed at that table for 2 hours. We talked about his mother. We talked about the mill, about things that happened when he was growing up. At some point, I told him about the morning I remodeled the kitchen, before he was born, when his mother and I were first in this house, and how the tiles I bought were slightly the wrong shade of white, and she never let me forget it. And we both laughed, and it was the first real laugh I'd had in a long time. He asked if he could come by on Sunday sometimes. Watch the game, have dinner. I told him yes. I've kept the crack in the grout near the stove. Never fixed it. Some things you leave because they're yours, because they remind you of what you almost let someone take. Jim still comes over Saturday mornings. I make the coffee, and we sit on the porch and don't say much, and that silence is worth more to me than any party in my own living room ever could have been. I don't know what happened to Stacy. I don't ask, and no one tells me. What I know is that my house smells like my house again. My mugs are where they belong. My chair is mine. And on the mantel, right where she belongs, is the photograph of Connie. No one is ever moving that again.